Morning, Joe. Good to see you this morning.
It's good to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming into our studios today. We have been hot and heavy since 6 o'clock this morning.
I believe it, and I mean, we've been getting the online feedback just as much as you get. But I'm curious, Joe, now that we've had a couple of days for what happened in Dallas as a response to what happened earlier in the week. It's been a week now since everything kind of started. So what are you feeling today as we've had kind of this weekend to let this all sink in?
My honest feeling, and the feeling of the audience, which I like to express more so than my feeling, is that I think this is a time when we all should recognize we're in this together. I mean, one of the things that was pointed out, African Americans have been dealing with the issue of police brutality for 75 years. Someone pointed that out over the weekend. Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund addressed this issue 75 years ago. The only difference is now we have cell phone videos. Sometimes things were concealed that are now being revealed. And I think at the same time, this is when we need to go beyond the lip service of community policing. For example, we had a lady who called in and said that we ought to now do what we do to truck drivers who listen to our show every day, and that is when they're involved in a shooting, there should be an immediate drug test of police officers. And then we're arguing today, and I say arguing, not in a confrontational way. If the president goes to Dallas, which he should and plans to, should he also visit Minnesota? Should he also visit Baton Rouge? And most of my callers, with few exceptions, say yes. And the message may be different, but I think this is an opportunity for him to bring everybody together.
I want to ask you this. In the wake of the shooting in Dallas, a lot of people on social media were talking about how something just didn't seem right with how everything played out, and the arrest, or I'm sorry, the taking out of the gunman. What are your callers saying about this? Is there a sense of we don't know the whole story yet? Are you hearing that as well?
Oh no, I got to tell you, to be honest, I have not heard that at all. The vast majority of our callers here to our show have expressed deep sympathy and remorse of what has in fact happened to the police officers, to the police department in Dallas and their families. There has not been a single call, not one single call that suggests that there was something, for lack of a better word, fishy with the police department. Now, there are those who are suggesting, and I'm one of them, that I think he did not act alone, or he may have had, there may be people who are complicit. It's really interesting how you could be an African American in the South, acquire those kinds of weapons, bulletproof vest, explosive materials, and it not raise a red flag in Dallas, Texas. Come on. And so that's what a lot of people are curious. Yes.
Yeah. That's actually what I was getting at. I want to make sure everyone understands. It's not to say that the police department did something wrong, but that this gunman acted alone in the way it was carried out. Some people are expressing questions as to how can one person have done all this. So I'm speaking to what you addressed in the last point of
yes, and that's exactly what I'm hearing. And again, I'm not privy to any inside information, but I think people ought to be careful before you accept this lone gunman, lone wolf theory, because they could very well be trying to flush people out. That's just my sense and the sense of many people who are calling in. And we also have been, it's interesting, we have heard from police officers just before you guys came to us, a gentleman who was a veteran, a military veteran, a police veteran, who said he now works for internal, what do they call it, internal what?
Internal affairs?
Yes, internal affairs. And he says, he's been asked too often to just brush things under the rug. He refuses to do something. So my argument has been, if the black community needs to be concerned, as the former mayor of New York, Giuliani, said, about black-on-black crime, then, you know, the same applies to police officers. If they see something, they should say something. If we see something, we should say something. And that's what I think where the conversation should now go. You cannot call on the black community to stop black-on-black crime and then expect police officers to remain silent. If it's 2%, 1%, I don't care what the percentage is, you cannot remain silent and allow that 1, 2, or 3% to give the entire department a black eye.
Joe, I have a question for you about this whole situation where you have people who don't seem to understand that you can be pro-police but anti-police brutality. Why do you think that is, and why do your callers think that is?
Because, look, folks need to understand, when I use the term, or callers use the term, or people who say Black Lives Matter, they're not saying anti-other lives matter. They have to, you know, let's take an example. Dallas, Texas had made a turnaround. There was a case in Dallas where an African-American woman called the police, and this was reported, I believe, in the Washington Post, where she called the police because someone was breaking into her house. She comes out on the porch to let the police know that this was her home. She happened to have a gun in a state where you're allowed to have guns for her protection. They shot and killed her. And so we're caught between two forces here. One, yes, the violence in our community. And who are usually the victims of violence in the black community? That's black people, just like those who are victims in the white community. That's why this black-on-black crime discussion is absurd, because white-on-white crime is just as bad. But on the other hand, you know, I had a colleague of mine say, now I get it. When I tell my grown son, who's a young African-American adult, be careful when you go out there. Be very careful when you have to deal with the police. My colleague, who happens to be a former anchor woman in New York, said, I now get it. I tell my son, call the police. It's two entire different worlds, two entirely different. And unfortunately, most of white America has not been privy to what our discussions are like at our dinner table, our family reunions, our gatherings, our churches, our community groups. And that's why I took such exception to what Giuliani said when he suggested it was inherently racist to say Black Lives Matter. I just did a story of a police officer, a rookie police officer in Overland Park, Kansas, who tweeted to about a 5-year-old who he put on his Facebook, you better be careful and keep her close to you because it might be the last time that you get a chance to hold her. Now, thank God they fired that rookie police officer, and that's what ought to be done throughout this country in order to regain trust on both sides.
All right, Joe, thank you so much for your time. Very impactful, powerful conversation. We're going to keep this going at 10 o'clock with more discussion on this.